Hi, ladies. Well, today we're going to begin a new series on the book of Esther, and the title of this series is called Women of Courage, Born for Such a Time as This. I'm really excited to go through this book with you because as a woman, it teaches us so many relatable topics such as courage, beauty, virtue, honor, wisdom, and so many other things. So I pray that this message ministers to you like it did for me. And so the title of this message is called A King's Glory. So Esther started out during a time when a king named King Ahasuerus was ruling over 127 provinces, when on his third year he decided that he wanted to give a 180-day celebration for his people. And on top of that celebration, he wanted to give them an additional 7-day feast, and even the women of his palace got a feast just for them. Wow, how amazing does that sound? I know as women, we love to get ready, get dressed up, go out with our friends, and be treated and be celebrated, right? So unfortunately, the reason for this king celebration was actually to show off his wealth, his power, his majesty, and his glory, rather than being a sincere gift of his love and appreciation for his people. Well, me, myself, I find it hard to appreciate a gift that is not sincere. Even though I might be able to accept the gift anyway, I still would feel undervalued and unappreciated. What kind of king is that to use his vain ambition only to feel good about himself, to feel like he's the greatest, and to feel good about his own generosity and charity, right? So, unlike this king, there lives a heavenly king who sits on his throne thinking about you and me, yearning for us to receive his great love, and who goes to prepare an even better place for us. You see, that is waiting you and I when we live in the abundance of God's love. And compared to this king's glory, God's glory is unmatched, and compared to this king's goodness and riches, God's glory and riches do not end. And compared to this king's gift of what seemed like his love and appreciation for his people, God's love is unending and unconditional. It is not something that you could work for, earn, be born into, but he gives it to you because he loves you, okay? Now, verse 10 in Esther chapter 1, it tells us that on the very last day of the feast, the king was already drunk with wine when he and other men were arguing over which country had the most beautiful woman. So the king decided that he was going to stop the conversation and end it by calling for his beautiful wife, Queen Vashti, to come and display herself, her body, in an immodest way in front of the people and the princes. See, even back then, men objectified women and viewed them merely as property and beauty. Even more so, this was an example of a man who paraded his wife as nothing more than a trophy, and he failed to recognize that true beauty is when a woman clothes herself in strength and dignity, out of Proverbs 31:10, and it is not defined by fancy hair or fine jewelry, but of the inward person's quiet and gentle spirit, as 1 Peter 3:3-4 says. Now, I love what a great theologian named Matthew Henry says about this. He says that the king dishonored himself, he dishonored himself as a husband who ought to protect, but by no means expose his wife's virtue, and the wife's modesty, and he ought to be to her a covering of the eyes, not to uncover them. Meaning, a husband's love ought to move them to protect their wife's virtue, not to exploit it, okay? In these days, men and women were often strictly separated, and their Persian customs didn't look highly of a woman who paraded herself publicly, okay? Not only did this king diminish himself and his reputation by doing this, but he put great distress on his wife by asking her to make a show of her body. If it hadn't been for this king's intoxication with wine, he too would have honored his wife and not have asked this of her. But Matthew Henry says that when the wine goes in, the wit goes out, and men's reason departs from them, okay? So aren't you thankful for a righteous God whose ways are perfect and who always protects our virtue, okay? And so how do you think the queen reacted when she heard that she must do this? So verse 12 says, "But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command." And so though this Persian queen was not a believer of God, she wasn't a woman of God, didn't follow God, she still had enough wisdom and respect for herself and others to know that this was something she just shouldn't do, right? Her decision to resist royal demand showed her courage, her modesty, and that she would not violate the rules of virtue and decency. Yet the cost was great, and this verse continues, "At this the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him." Now I think any decent husband would understand his wife when she says, "I'm just uncomfortable with something," right? But his wrath points to a possible theory that she responded in an unsubmissive attitude, and so that's the reason for his rage. Now, Ephesians 5:24 says, "As the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything towards their husbands," okay? So if it's hard for me as a wife to have a submissive attitude when I tell my husband I just don't feel like cooking a big meal for dinner tonight, and there's nothing wrong with that, he's not asking me to sin, but still it's hard for me to show that submissive attitude. How hard must it have been for Queen Vashti when her husband asked her to reveal her body in this way to not only their people but to other princes of other countries? So, still as wives, God commands us to submit to our husbands in everything, and we can show this through our attitudes. Moving forward to the second half of this chapter, it says that the king went to these quote-unquote wise men to look for advice about what to do about his wife and how should he handle it. So one prince named Memucan raised his voice and basically said, "Not only against you, King Ahasuerus, has your wife wronged you, but against all people in all 127 of your provinces. Because when our wives hear about the queen's decision, our wives are no longer going to respect us, and there will be contempt in our homes." Okay, I give him that, and I understand, because as the Bible says, husbands are to be the heads of households, and we are to respect them, okay? However, the prince's solution to the king's issue was to remove the queen from her position and to choose someone else. Sadly, the unreasonable king accepted this proposal so that he could ensure honor in the household for every husband. Yes, so Queen Vashti's courage costed her her crown and her position. And so this foolish queen undervalued his wife when he should have honored her dignity. So this chapter causes me to think about so many things and to ask myself so many questions. And the first question I would ask is, am I wanting glory for myself like this king did? And am I wanting other people to recognize my goodness just like the king did? The Bible says in Matthew 23:12, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." You and I do not have to worry about what others think about us, because God is our ultimate audience and He watches over our lives. So let's ask God to remove any selfish pride within us and to constantly keep Him as the apple of our eye. The second question I would ask is, am I trying to store any treasures here on earth? Is God's inheritance not enough for me? In Revelations 21, the Bible talks about a new heaven and a new earth, and a place that God is preparing for His bride, full of beauty, wisdom, wholeness, and light. And His promises are indeed trustworthy and true. In John 14 it says, "In my Father's house are many rooms, and if it were not so, would I have told you?" So dear friends, God knows that as women we desire more than anything that could be found on this earth. So not only is He preparing a place for you and I, but His treasure is available here and now when we believe in Him. The next question I would ask is, am I a virtuous woman? What is my reaction to things that test my honor and my virtue? I know what it's like to want to feel beautiful by putting my body out there, and I also know how offensive it feels when other people tell me what to do with my body. Beauty and modesty are common issues for women, and none of us have held our standards perfectly. But a new day gives us the opportunity to decide if we will not violate God's standards of beauty, but rather adorn ourselves with grace and goodness. The final question to myself is, do I trust God to work everything out in my life for good? When the king removed Vashti from her position and divorced her to marry someone else, I cannot imagine the pain and betrayal she must have felt. So if you read the book of Esther, you will see that the name of God is not mentioned one time, but it is plain to see that His fingerprints and His presence was always there. You will see that throughout the tragedies of this book, God was still in control, and He turned around every single tragedy for good. In fact, all events play a historical part in saving His people from destruction. So if God did all of this then, imagine what He is working out right now in your life. So I pray that this message blessed you, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. God bless.